Wow, this is awkward. It's been almost an entire full year. In fact, a couple days later than that, since I made my last video on this YouTube channel. A lot of stuff happened. I'm gonna kind of skip through the intro as fast as I can here because this is a serious topic and I'm sure this video is going to be way longer than I personally want it to be. So, in case you've been living under a rock or you're not in the US, it was revealed to us that a couple days ago, Roe v. Wade was overturned in the US Supreme Court. Now, you can Google what that means in full and get like a full definition, and do your own research, but to paraphrase, abortion was legal in the United States and now it isn't. And a lot of people are really upset about that, rightfully so. And a good amount of people, although not as many as people who are pro choice, many people are pro life or the opposite standpoint who believe that abortion should not be legal and it's immoral and sorts. So, naturally, when I heard this news, this is some lore about me if y'all didn't know, but I consider myself to be politically active. I try to get the news, I try to get the biggest scoop, I try to look at all sides of an argument, and I do enjoy having debates. And because of that, I ended up having a debate with someone who I will not disclose over Discord. And that person is pro life, and I am pro choice. And so we were, having a debate, whatever. And he sends me this video by John Doyle called Refuting Every Pro Choice Argument on his show, Heck Off Commie. And he told me to watch it, and you can see I've already disliked it here. He told me to watch it and see if I could refute any points, and this is basically the gist of what he believes to be all of the reasons why he is pro-life rather than pro-choice. And so this is a almost 40-minute long video here. It's about 36 minutes, 37. And he refutes a lot of points that many he refutes many points that are common among the pro-choice crowd. And so he's pro-life, and he's refuting every one of these arguments and proving them wrong. While I was watching through this, obviously there are some things I agreed with, there are some things I didn't agree with, and there's a character limit on Discord, and I thought to myself, I'm not going to type every single fucking thought that I have, because that's going to end up being a 13-page essay with MLA formatting, and you can't send that in Discord because it stops you before you reach that point. And so I thought to myself, I would have to make my own video that would be 30 minutes long in order to refute every single one of his points. So that's exactly what I'm doing. Alright, so without further ado, I would just jump right into it and we'll see what he says, and anything that I deem to be misinformation, incorrect, or even some things that I'm just confused about, I will pause the video and I will talk about it.
Facebook, mainstream news, the depths of all of that toxic stuff, and I've condensed what I found into a list of the most common pro-abortion arguments. There's like 20 or 30 something that I found. There's a lot of repetition from the low IQ individuals that were complaining about this whole thing.
Alright, so this is just his intro, but I would just like to immediately point out, and this goes for all political commentators, left, right, center. Why does almost every single political activist start by insulting the opposite side? If you make a video titled, "Here's why you should be pro-life," and you start the video not even 20 seconds in, saying that everyone on the opposite side is a low IQ individual and they're small-brained and they're repetitive and ignorant, that's not going to make people listen to you. That's going to make people think, oh, okay, he thinks that I'm stupid because I don't agree with him. That's not going to make people more interested in what you have to say. And that's not going to make people willing to listen to you if the first thing that you do is insult them, tell them they're stupid, and then give facts and evidence. That's not the right order of operations here. So I'm going to attempt to skip through his intro and his weird intro where he's just like smoking a cigarette or something, and we're just going to jump right into the first refuted point The constitutional right to
First
abortion.
up at bat, the constitutional right argument. We hear this from Bernie Sanders. We hear this from Elizabeth Warren. The idea that we have a constitutional right to abortion. That's not true on any level. On the surface, it's false, of course, because the Constitution does not say that anywhere. You dig a bit deeper, it's still false. And here's basically what happens. So you've got Griswold versus Connecticut in 1960.
So I'm going to pause really quickly here. Just because something isn't inherently stated in the Constitution doesn't mean that that is not a right that you are allowed to have. In the Constitution, nowhere does it mention that women or black men or any men that aren't white should have rights. And clearly they fucking didn't for the first couple decades of America's very, very early colonization and existence as an actual country. And so we refuted that clearly, and we won most of our rights back. There's obviously still some discrimination against women, Arabs, Asians, Muslims even, like religion and, obvious minorities. But him stating that it's not in the Constitution doesn't really prove his point, because it wasn't in the Constitution that black men should even have anything at all, and we were all fucking slaves. So I'm not sure why he's saying that just because it's not in the Constitution. It's completely null and void. We can amend the Constitution. We can make rights. If someone believes that we have a constitutional right, which is the phrase that he's ignoring, and he's assuming that we're all saying that there is a definite constitutional right, then that would make sense. If we believe that there's a right,
65, the Supreme Court established that the 5th and 14th Amendments implied a right to privacy, and so they established that as judicial precedent. This was then used in Roe v. Wade because from there they used the right to privacy to encompass a woman's private decision whether or not to murder her child. So now you've got people that are saying that women have the right to an abortion, and a constitutional right even, and of course such is not the case. You absolute fools. So now you flash back a little bit, enter stage 1791, James Madison, a Federalist. And for those of you who don't know that federalism, or what federalism is, Federalists believe in a separation of power between...
The reason the right to privacy was used to defend the right to abortion is because abortion is a medical procedure. Medical procedures that happen between you and your doctor, physician, OBGYN, etc. That is confidential information, because those procedures and information about your body that your doctor knows is in your medical records. Your medical records are incredibly confidential, private pieces of information that almost nobody in the world can get to. It takes an incredible amount of certification and evidence to show that you have the right to someone's medical documents, or you have like the ability to access them, I should say, rather. And so by comparison, if abortion is a medical procedure that is considered extremely emotionally delicate and also just a medically delicate process, then it would make sense that because it's in the medical records and private, that it shouldn't be the government's business, because it's also not the government's business whether or not you get blood pressure medicine or not, or if you have a heart attack or something and you need to get an emergency procedure done. It's not necessarily in the government's interest to say whether or not you can have that, because that's not their job to dictate it. It's the doctor's job, and if the procedure was administered, then clearly the doctor believes that it was somewhat necessary, or at least had a valid reason to carry out that said procedure. Now, obviously, the federal government technically does have a hand in that by providing money to the hospital. Obviously, if there's like Medicare or Medicaid, that's a separate discussion. But generally, the government can't say whether or not you can have a medical procedure, because they're not doctors, and medical procedures are confidential information by definition.
Between the states and the federal government, kind of like what we have now, except the federal government really likes to overstep its power. Like here, for instance, because James Madison wrote the 9th and 10th Amendments to be pro-federalism amendments. The 9th Amendment states that the government can't infringe upon rights just because they aren't specifically outlined in the Constitution.
We're going to pause there. The government cannot infringe upon your rights simply because it is not explicitly stated. I hate to cut him off, but earlier here, he stated that you can't say that abortion is a constitutional right because it's not in the Constitution. And even if you believe that it is your right, even if it's not a constitutional right, if you believe that it's your right, he calls you foolish. Yet the Ninth Amendment completely nullifies his position here because he's not even the government. He just thinks you're wrong. And at this point, he doesn't even give a legitimate reason.
And then the 10th Amendment states that any power not delegated specifically to the federal government is given to the states. So what they've done is say the 9th Amendment actually guarantees a right to privacy. Therefore, the 10th Amendment doesn't apply here, and abortion access must be allowed at the federal level. That argument is irrelevant. It is irrelevant. Here's why. So, during Roe, they argued that it is a private decision to be made between a woman and her physician, abortion. Therefore, abortion access is encompassed by the right to privacy and also because of the 14th Amendment's concept of liberty. So, the question is abortion really a private matter? No. No, it is not, because in order to consider abortion a private matter, you not only have to completely ignore the nature of the procedure, but also the outside interests that are affected by the abortion. If we agree that a private matter would be if individual interests in which government and uninvolved third parties can claim no valid or permissible interest, it follows that before the abortion decision may be characterized as a private matter or not, between a woman and her physician, the non-maternal interests involved in such a decision must be identified and then weighed so as to confirm they have no valid or permissible interest.
So I'm going to pause here because there are a number of things that I found either confusing or wrong. So first off, he says that the nature of the procedure must be weighed, and I'm assuming he's just saying that abortion is murder, which I'll get to why that's incorrect later. If we're going to assume, for the sake of my argument, that abortion is not murder, what else could he be talking about during the nature of the procedure? Even if we're going to assume, for the sake of his argument, that abortion is murder, he says that he wants to weigh the non-maternal interests, and that's a problem because in a good amount of abortion cases, it's because they don't want the child and the husband doesn't want the child either, or in some cases, like rape and incest, they don't want the child because the husband does. So if the woman says, I don't want this child, I was raped, this and that, or, he's abusing me, or, I don't want to be with him, and the husband says, well, no, I want you to have the baby, who's to be weighed as more important here? So what are you exactly implying, Doyle? Are you going to side with the man because the man is the head of the house in the relationship? But you can't say that because that would be enforcing your morals and your idea of a perfect family. Furthermore, your idea of a patriarchy onto the woman. That's not fair. We can't say a man has more word than a woman, and we can't even say that a woman has more word than a man. It's specifically because the procedure only involves the doctor's medical opinion and the woman's decision to have that abortion in the first place that the non-maternal interest shouldn't even matter, especially because there are situations in which the non-maternal interest is malicious in nature.
The primary non-maternal interest, of course, would be the life of the unborn. That's the whole shtick, since the unborn are not capable of serving or protecting their own interests.
So, by non-maternal, I at first thought he was talking about, obviously, like the father or the rest of the family, how they view the abortion. But by non-maternal, I suppose he meant issues that just aren't involved with the mother. And I'm not sure why he's saying that protecting the unborn baby is a non-maternal interest, because the baby is inside of the mother. That's inherently maternal, is it not?
Those interests must be protected and asserted by government or by concerned third parties. That would be the pro-life movement. Approaching the problem from the perspective of those who perceive abortion as the taking of a human life, rejection of the privacy argument follows logically from the commonly held belief that the taking of a human life is a proper matter of societal concern. Given the interest being asserted by the opponents of legal abortion, which is the right of the unborn child to life, making a pro-abortion argument that's based upon the right to privacy is no argument at all. That is not an argument. That's a conclusion based upon a decision that maternal interests take precedence over the lives of the unborn. And as we'll go over, the vast majority of abortions aren't about the mother's health or about rape. They're about lifestyle convenience. Abortion is not a private matter. Sure, maybe the personal decision, maybe that's a private matter, but when does it stop being private? At what arbitrary point would the line be drawn? Is it still private when the state licensed practitioner performs the procedure in a regulated health facility? And remember, the legal precedent that established this right to privacy was within the context of, hey, people should have the privacy in their bedrooms to choose whether or not to take birth control. And now it turns out that that privacy also encompasses an operating theater in a hospital in which a child is murdered. Like, are you joking? Am I being punked? Where's Ash? Is Ashton here?
All right, so he's getting a little bit eccentric here and going off on his own little bit. So I would like to stop him and say that when he states that the vast majority of abortions are not about the mother's health and are instead about quote-unquote convenience, as he states, I did my own research using the same sources as him and even different sources that are just not conclusive to what he's talking about. I'm stuttering here and slowing down because he's just wrong. There's no evidence that says that mothers got rid of her baby for convenience. There are a number of reasons that have nothing to do with just a convenient lifestyle, and I'm not sure where he found that article, as I'm not able to see exactly where he got that headline from, because there's no name of the article. He doesn't give any sources, which is red flag number one, why you don't want to show your sources, possibly because they're all far-right propaganda. So after doing my own extensive research, I will show them on screen here, and as you can see, nothing about convenience or simply the lifestyle of the mother is mentioned at all. So I'm not too sure what he's talking about.
Okay, so women have a right to control their own bodies. We shouldn't be forced to have kids. Correct. We agree. No one's forcing you to have kids. No one's advocating for pregnancy quotas. Something has to happen to you before you become pregnant. Something that typically only happened when a mommy and a daddy loved each other very much, and then, we go from there. So reproduction does not occur at the hospital. Reproduction, by definition, takes place at conception.
So I'm going to immediately stop him here because I remembered a point where I remembered a point that I needed to say when he was talking about the constitutional right. So whether or not it is a constitutional right is not the point. It's irrelevant. We can amend and codify almost any law regardless of whether it was a right previously or not. I already said that. We should codify Roe v. Wade because the majority of Americans believe that Roe v. Wade should continue to be a law. Here's a statistic on screen that shows that more than half of the Americans support abortion, and so the pro-life movement is statistically a minority. When in America have we ever listened to any minorities, statistical or racial? Are we going to start now just because they're full of a bunch of white men? Furthermore, I'd like to add that all the judges that advocated for the removal of Roe v. Wade previously stated in their indictment years prior that they would not change the ruling. The fact is that it was recently overturned. That means that the way our court runs, basically on the idea of trust, is outdated and we should just fully revamp it. If we put abortion aside, can we just all agree that our government is completely untrustworthy? We shouldn't allow our judges to fully lie about their political standing and how they're going to rule on future precedents. This is reflected once again when you account for the fact that 3 judges have significant evidence proving that they're sexual assailants, and yet again, there's no consequence at all. They just lie and use their place of power to get away from every single thing that they do wrong. Clarence Thomas used his privilege in order to obstruct the investigation of his wife being involved in the January 6th riots. This is literally an insurrection. This was all illegal. This is one of the biggest problems and controversies of modern day America, and he's directly obstructing justice by not allowing people to investigate what his wife was doing and what her involvement was in the January 6th riots. That's just disgusting. We're going to allow our judges to lie and misinform the entire country, and you're going to vote for them and agree with them when they say that abortion is illegal because they said so. I just think that's a little bit weird. The second point I'd like to touch on is what he's talking about now. His standpoint, if you don't want to get pregnant, just don't have sex. Denying anyone the pleasure and health benefits of consensual sex simply because you believe that sex should only be to procreate is foolish, and you're enforcing your morals onto someone else, and they're not established objective morals. Even if you want to believe that our Constitution doesn't support the right to get an abortion, the Constitution does support our right to have sex the way we want to. It is is within our right and privacy to decide whether or not we want children in the first place, and the creation of contraceptives and birth control further give us that right to practice safe, consensual sex without the risk of getting pregnant. Simply put, pregnancy has a dangerously high mortality rate once you compare it to the mortality rate of abortions, especially illegal ones. Pregnancy is among one of the most painful experiences a human can ever go through. Is it truly wrong for a woman to want to avoid giving birth? Well, you just shouldn't have had sex. Well, once again, you can't gatekeep the act of having sex just because you think that the one reason you should only have sex is to make a child. Like previously mentioned, there are massive amounts of evidence for the other health reasons for having sex. You can't just invalidate all of those and ignore my reasoning. In the case of the 40% women who got pregnant, they got pregnant because they were not using contraceptives. It's still their right to practice sex without protection, and there's also reasons for that. Perhaps condoms are too expensive, or they aren't sold in the area of the woman, which is now a very real problem considering that contraceptives are being banned across the country as well. The majority of abortions are had by black women, which means that if 40% of pregnancies were because the woman wasn't using contraceptives, and most abortions are black women, that would imply that most black women aren't using contraceptives. And this is because of the rate that poverty and systematic racism is destroying our black communities. There certainly aren't affordable condoms, and there might not even be any condoms in the first place. So it's reasonable why someone would get an abortion, because there's no other way to practice safe sex where they live. If the preservation of life was truly the issue, why not help people have safe sex without getting pregnant, therefore eliminating the idea that there even should be an unborn baby, by making contraceptives more affordable and accessible to everybody around the United States? It doesn't make sense to ban contraceptives along with abortions, as that pushes forward the idea that you shouldn't have sex unless you want a child, which is a downright outdated point of view that you simply can't enforce onto other people. I'm fully aware that many pro-lifers, along with many other religious people who don't even have a political affiliation, believe that sex before marriage is immoral, when in reality it's truly unmoral, not immoral, meaning it is not affected by morality at all. It's simply a choice. But what are you going to do about those who are married and still don't want children? How are you going to deny them their lawful and, in the case of religion, their quote-unquote God-given right to practice sex? Who's to say that everybody who has sex while not wanting kids has a horrible relationship and is entranced by not love, but lust? That is their privacy that we once again cannot delve into. Privacy that is, unlike abortion, according to John Doyle, protected by the Constitution. If the overturning of Roe v. Wade was only about protecting the life of the child, why ban contraceptives? By denying women and men the ability to have sex without birthing a child, the Supreme Court indirectly implies that having sex is purely for the purpose of procreation, and to act otherwise is considered unlawful. This portion of the overturning directly contradicts our right of privacy and is enforcing subconscious religious morals and morals regardless that aren't objective onto other people for absolutely no reason.
You deliver at the hospital has already been produced. What we're concerned about is not your body. We are actually concerned about the life that is growing inside of your body, which is overwhelmingly a result of choices that you made. Sometimes it was because of rape, yes, and we will go over that, but over 99% of the time a baby is facing being aborted. That baby was created consensually. The baby is a result of your own actions.
So I'm not going to talk a lot while I just watch this, because I've watched this video multiple times through. And in that whole tangent I refuted all of the points he made during this whole segment, and there's nothing further that I need to say. You can compare his words to mine, whichever one comes first. I could have said it after or before, and my statement still wouldn't have been disproved or even proven furthermore than what I've already stated. I would just like to mention, he's using research from a 2004 study and then later mocks a 2001 book because of how outdated it is. And so if you're going to use evidence from abortions from 1987 to 2004, when it's 2019 at the time of this, 2022 at the time that I'm making this video, you're ignorant and you should look for new, more recent evidence.
Would you like to know what the odds are of becoming pregnant if you don't have sex? Zero. Won't happen. But you're like, well, I want to do that thing that was designed to create life, but here's the catch. I don't actually want to create the life. Well, then act like it. 46% of women getting abortions did not use any form of birth control in the month that they had conceived the child. And among those that did use birth control, a significant proportion was using it inconsistently. So now, because you were irresponsible, you wanted to have sex without consequence, and then you didn't even take the necessary precautions to avoid that consequence. Now a child has to die because of your irresponsibility.
Did you ever think to consider that the reason that they were not using contraceptives consistently is because it was hard to obtain them, or hard to obtain a contraceptive that legitimately worked, as only 70% of condoms are effective? How do you know that they're truly being irresponsible? You just simply can't make that assumption by looking at statistics. You're correlating things that have absolutely no connection to each other, and you're projecting.
Is what you're saying. Oh, well, maybe if women had access to birth control, they could. Condoms are 50 cents. Shut up.
Condoms are 50 cents, huh? $7. Well, actually, $8, $7.50, $18. Oof, $8, $8, $12, $7. Oof. Okay, let's I don't know. Let's Trojan condoms. You can see I already searched this up to fact check him. $8, $8, $18, $18, $18, $30, $18, $19, $14, $17. Wow, yeah, maybe 50 cents when you're using the fucking 1950s mint.
You could be simultaneously using 3 forms of birth control and still get pregnant. That's the risk you have to bear in mind. This should not surprise you. Why is it they always have to...
So, he literally just said that you can use 3 forms of birth control and still get pregnant. So, if they don't use contraceptives, they're irresponsible. And if they use contraceptives and it doesn't work, then, oh well, fuck you, that's your fault, you had sex. That goes back to my original point. Why should sex be gatekept as if it's only used for procreation? You're weird and you're a caveman.
To follow up by forwarding the blame. Oh, but if only, like, just be responsible. If you were responsible, there would be no need for abortion in the first place. The idea that you have a right to choose is not only incorrect, as we just went over, but it assumes that you...
He's also completely ignoring the medical reasons for abortion, and there's plenty, like having a miscarriage, a stillborn, or having a baby that is born without his cranium and a heartbeat, which means that even if the baby is born, it will immediately go into cardiac arrest and die because it doesn't have the portion of its brain that it needs to survive.
You have a right to what you're choosing over the life of the child. That child has a right to life, as we all do. It's in the Constitution. You don't get to end that life at your convenience because of something that you're convinced is hiding somewhere between the lines of the Constitution. And sure, the precedent for now is on your side, that the child isn't protected under the 14th Amendment, and that's why they have to maintain the euphemisms. That's why they have to repeat the focus group talking points. It's a clump of cells. It's the termination of a pregnancy, because there's no way to make a coherent and moral argument on behalf of killing your child for your...
No, that's because they're literally describing what it is. Abortion is not murder, it's a termination of a pregnancy. That is the description of an abortion. By you assuming it's murder, by using technicalities and trying to go around the medical term and say, well, actually it's this because it's living, you're the one making excuses here.
Convenience. Things like, oh, I'm done having children. I'm a student. I don't feel mature enough, which makes up 85% of abortion cases. These figures even coming from a pro-abortion institute. Okay, next one. The baby's not viable. The baby is not viable, therefore it's not alive. It has no rights. Okay, sure. What do you mean by viable? That the baby's not able to survive independently? Sure. What about babies that have been delivered, now they're in the care of their parents? They aren't viable. If you leave it alone, it will die. Is that death justified? Should the parents not be prosecuted for negligence? What about your elderly relatives? My grandma lived to be 96. She definitely was not viable for her last few years. To her merit, she tried to be, but there was no way that she would have survived without the care or supervision that she received. Does that forfeit the validity of her life because she wasn't viable? What you'll find is that regardless of which arbitrary metric you choose to adjudicate viability, there is a parallel circumstance for other human lives that you would not agree have no right to life. The youngest surviving premature baby was born at 21 weeks. His name is James Gill, and had he been killed by his parents the day after his birthday, his parents would be rightfully prosecuted. But babies can be killed in the womb at that same age, and no one bats an eye because it's all according to plan. He's obviously the extreme example. Even infants born at 26 weeks have a 90% chance of survival, and those born at 23 weeks have between a 20 and 35% chance. Well, infants born at 8 weeks can't survive, therefore they're not viable. Again, ability to independently survive, equating to viability, would invalidate the right to life that toddlers have, that people on life support have, all sorts of people that you wouldn't try to make a case against regarding their right to live. It gets even more disturbing when they start talking about cognitive development. I don't even know if I want to get into that because it's basically eugenics against people with mental impairments if the logic is consistently applied. What's the difference between a plant the day before or after it sprouted? It's still the same living thing, just in a different stage of development. There's no way to consistently apply this logic without dictating that certain people don't get to live as a result. Okay, the baby...
This is the first point that I actually have no gripes with. I fully agree. For you to say that the baby is not viable because it's not smart and can't think, and to also say that the baby is not viable because it simply can't survive on its own, it's a technicality, and that's just wrong. So I agree with him on this point fully. I don't think that you should use that as an excuse or as a reason to why abortion should be legalized. The only situation in which you would say that a baby is not viable and would therefore be okay to abort is the previous scenario where I mentioned if the cranium is not even on the baby and it can't develop and it has half of a brain, then the baby is just fully actually not viable and it cannot grow into a functional human being.
He is incapable of feeling pain. I don't see how this is even relevant. It's not true, but no one is saying babies have a right to...
So he says it's not true. It certainly is true. Babies cannot feel pain in the womb until about halfway through the second trimester, or even close to the third trimester in some cases. They do begin growing sensory receptors around the edges of the mouth very early, but they can't feel pain, and by definition, in order to know what pain even is, you need to have experienced something opposite to pain to be able to contrast it. They just don't even know what pain is. So while I agree with him, because it's irrelevant saying if babies feel pain or not, that's irrelevant to whether or not abortion should be legal and whether or not it's moral. Just because they can't feel pain doesn't mean that it should, be legal or illegal. Even if they could feel pain, that's not a reason on its own to say that abortion should be illegal. The only gripe with this is that he says that they can't feel pain, or no, the only gripe is that he says that they can feel pain and they just simply can't until the third trimester, so we're going to skip ahead.
Next one. Restricting abortion access costs lives, ironically ignoring that enabling abortion access costs lives by definition. But what they're saying is that women will now seek out...
Once again, this is circular reasoning. We're assuming that abortion is murder, which I will prove wrong later on because I have to wait for him to actually give a prompt for me to attack because I want to wait for the right moment.
Legal abortions and will be more likely to die as a result. This is not true. Abortion rates increased dramatically after Roe v. Wade.
So, oh boy. Here's where we get a little bit out of pocket. John mentions that the amount of abortions per year skyrocketed after Roe v. Wade and argues that this increases the amount of child deaths, which is, like I said, circular reasoning. He uses his belief, not fact, his belief at this point, because it's commonly debated, that abortion is murder to support that abortion kills babies because it's murder, essentially. Of course the amount of abortions skyrocketed after the law to make abortions legal was passed, John. Good job. Nice. You can look at statistics. You have some form of intelligence. Because abortion was now legal, all of the secret and illegal abortions that were recorded illegally and undocumented, are now becoming legal and thrust into the throes of the public eye and statisticians. Up until this point in the video, he hasn't even necessarily proved that abortion is murder, so even if the abortion rate skyrocketed, this doesn't prove that this increased the amount of child deaths, quote unquote. Also, while abortion rates dramatically increased in the decade after Roe v. Wade, they started to slowly decrease dramatically in the following years as well, which he generously forgot to mention in this video. He gives this graph, which abruptly ends conveniently at around 2008 before the visible decline of abortions. In fact, you can even see it slow down and start to plateau even in the years that he's showing. As of 2022, pre-Roe overturning of course, the abortion rate is actually at an all-time low, lower than even pre-Roe rulings. The statistic he shows here is null and void and outdated.
And also, abortion as a procedure is inherently somewhat dangerous. The year before Roe, 39 women died from illegal abortions and 24 women died from legal abortions.
He says that abortions are dangerous. Pregnancies are just statistically more dangerous than abortions. By saying that people died from abortions, okay, there's a risk factor. Yes, you are correct. People died from abortions. They were legal and illegal abortions, yes. How many women survived from those abortions? How many lives did that abortion save? He never mentions the opposite side.
And they'll say, oh, conservatives think that abortion bans will work, but gun bans won't? Idiots. And it's like, no, straw man. You guys unironically think abortion bans won't work, but gun bans will. The argument isn't whether or not the gun ban will work. The argument is whether or not you can even do it. I don't care if the gun ban will work. It just so happens the evidence is on my side. But even if it wasn't, you could not convince me to disarm myself.
I'm just gonna skip this point about him talking about, oh, there's no, oh, I thought there was like a whole thing about gun laws. Anyway, he's right. Like, we literally can't ban guns. We can start being more strict about how you can get a gun, the training that you need, background checks. You should have a license. You should be forced to show a license to show that you have the ability to carry a gun. Holy shit. To carry a gun lawfully, and that's not a gun ban. That's just restricting guns more. Fully banning guns is unrealistic, and it's also a constitutional right. So unless we have a prohibition situation where we fully just nullify that amendment, I don't see how we could fully ban guns. So he's actually correct here, and the rest of this little part of the video doesn't talk about abortion costing lives. He just argues why you should have a gun, and so I'm just going to skip over that.
Typically, this triggers the, but no child should be born unwanted. The child won't be wanted, therefore we can kill it. Why do you get to decide what quality of life that child is entitled to? Why is it that you get to say, well, I wouldn't be happy if I were put up for adoption or if I was born into a poor family, so I'm going to actually do the child a favor by killing it?
He's right here. That's a philosophical decision, and he's half right, half wrong, I believe, because it's a philosophical decision to say, that's a very popular one, actually. Is it better to give birth to new life and have them have all of these great experiences? Or are you actually doing your unborn child a favor by either abstaining from sex or aborting your baby because life is hard, and life is full of a lot of hardships, and you're doing them a favor by not even making them go through hardships? They'll be drifting in the void, experiencing absolutely nothing. Furthermore, they're comparing experiencing absolutely nothing at all to experiencing both hardships and some good times, and weighing the options here. Would you rather have a potentially horrible, good, or balanced life? Random choice, actually. Or would you rather just have nothing at all? Some people believe that they would just rather not exist at all and live in peace and ignorance of not knowing anything that has ever happened because they don't exist. So this is a philosophical question, and the reason why I say he's half correct is because, well, this is his opinion, and I agree with his opinion. If your only reason for why you think abortion should be legal is because you're doing the children a favor, that's a little bit weird, and you don't technically get to decide that.
Child. Next one. Abortion reduces crime. This is from that Freakonomics guy. What's his face? Stephen Levitt. They published a study in 2001 claiming that since Roe v. Wade in 1973, crime had decreased significantly. It's because the would-be criminals have been aborted. This has actually been statistically refuted many times, but they're correct when they say that the crime dropped, but it's not because of abortion. And we know that young men between 17 and 25 commit the majority of crimes right when their aggression and immaturity are peaking. And so if abortion had been the cause of the crime decrease, we would have seen the crime rates in that age group decrease first. But that wasn't the case. The crime rates decreased in the older demographics. Nearly 60% of the decline of murder since 1990 involved killers that were older than 25, therefore making them born before Roe v. Wade and immune to abortion as a result. No one was talking about post-birth abortion back then. But even on the surface, it's the same thing. They're saying, hey, the algorithm says that if this child is born, it'll probably be a criminal. So let's kill it. Don't let it live and figure it out for itself. No, just kill it. Decide for the child. Ignore the child's right to choose. Its right to choose whether or not it starts carjacking people. I mean, practically everyone cool came from a broken home.
I feel like I don't need to explain why that quote is wildly incorrect and offensive to millions, but we're gonna let that slide.
Let him be the next Tim Allen or something, No matter how bad a home environment, there is no 100% guarantee that the child will become a criminal. And because of that, you can't say their life is invalid.
That's true. So I agree. Besides that weird ass quote he said in the middle of it, I agree with this whole point. You can't just. I mean, he said it best. I don't even need to say anything. I agree that abortion does not technically reduce crime. There's a correlation, but not a causation. So it's not the actual cause. It's just for some reason crime decreased after Roe v. Wade was passed.
We need abortion because population control. This is typical alarmist rhetoric.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna let him talk about this. It's an alarming. You don't need to control the population. Actually, that's just a little bit weird. So you're saying we're just naturally killing people because there's eventually going to be too many people on Earth? That's just incorrect. But I'll let him talk about it.
Oh, there's overpopulation. People will starve to death. Yeah, okay. It wasn't true in 1968 when that Stanford professor published that book, The Population Bomb, predicting worldwide famine and starvation. Of course, none of that happened. Poverty is decreasing. We're going to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030. Interesting how more people hasn't caused starvation and famine. People are living longer, more prosperous, and healthy lives than previous generations ever could have imagined. The UN, they're pretty dumb. They're freaking out about 11 billion by 2100. Other studies saying roughly 9 billion before 2060, and then our population is actually going to start to shrink. But again, you buying into overpopulation alarmism doesn't mean you get to kill other people. The only life that you get to control is your own. So hey, if you know something I don't about starvation and overpopulation, the only way to solve it is to immediately reduce the population. I don't know, man. Take one for the team, maybe. Increase my average caloric intake by 0.00004% since food is finite, I guess. I'm kidding. Kidding, it's a joke. Relax. Hey, don't get mad at me for making suicide jokes. I'm the one that's arguing that life is precious here, okay? Come on. Abortion in cases of rape or incest.
That's exactly why it's ironic, but it is a joke, and I'm not gonna bitch him on that. It's actually kind of funny.
Yeah, this one's actually pretty simple. No. Do you think we haven't thought this through when we say we're concerned about the child, the life of the child in the womb? And you say, well, what if she was raped? What if it's incest? Do you think we're going to be like, wait a second, we did not think this through? Okay, you know what? Never mind. No, in order for that to have any effect on the principle of us caring about that life, it would have to mean that because of the way that the child was conceived, its life is inherently less valuable. I know people that were conceived in rape. Do you believe that their life is inherently less valuable? I know that they certainly don't. It's awful. Absolutely. Yes, we agree. Should we publicly castrate the rapist, assuming there's evidence beyond a reasonable doubt? Yes, of course. We agree. Rape is bad. We should also be able to agree that murder is bad. And by the way, the fact that abortion and rape are brought up so much is intellectually dishonest. If you truly believed that abortion were okay, there would be no need to twist the morality by citing extreme cases that occur less than 2% of the time. If abortion were okay, you would say, well, what if I don't feel mature enough? What if it's inconvenient to my lifestyle? Again, 85% of the time. But you don't, because you know that that's selfish. So you say, well, what if I was raped? Because then that puts the pro-lifer in a tough position, because obviously that's a lot harder of a position to be in than keeping the child, despite you not feeling mature enough. But
alright, so third point here, he's approaching this argument completely wrong. When pro-choice activists ask pro-life activists what to do in the event of rape or incest, they're not stating that the baby's life is lesser than any other baby because of the situation that they were conceived in. They're trying to explain that in a situation in which a woman abstains from sex, which, according to John Doyle, is the best way not to get pregnant, that woman is then raped by a stranger or a family member, along with the obvious fact that the woman has the right to have the option to not have kids. She was literally forced to have sex and forced to bear her rapist child. In a world without abortions, you'd rather force that mother to live with the constant reminder of that trauma with a child that isn't even fully hers, as it wasn't a child made out of her love, but of the rapist's lust, rather than have her get a safe medical procedure that is less dangerous than the pregnancy in order to avoid the sad future? The question isn't of whether or not that child's life is important or not. The question is, should she have to live and care for a child that isn't hers while the rapist lives carefree? Even if abortions were legal for only cases of rape and incest, conservatives insist that there needs to be a legal investigation and prosecution of the rapist in order to prove that the woman isn't lying. The obvious problem with this is that the prosecution process can realistically take months on minimum, and pregnant women just don't have that time to spare. The baby could have already been born depending on when the investigation started, and even if the rapist is prosecuted, the baby will still be at least in second trimester or even well into third. At that case, you're not extracting an embryo or even a fetus. You're crushing and dismembering an almost fully born infant. Furthermore, to allocate for this and say, well, even though you're crushing the almost born baby, we're going to allow it to happen, that would contradict with more libertarian beliefs, not conservative, of not completing abortions past the first trimester.
Hey, pro-lifer. Hey, buddy, did you lose your balls? Don't let them bully you into cowering because of statistical anomalies. All life is valid regardless of the circumstances of conception. Period. That's the idea. If you're uncomfortable with that, perhaps reconsider your morality. We can't make exceptions for rape and incest. To do that would suggest that that life is less valuable, which it isn't. And then that would also collapse the whole point of our movement. Also, how do we prove it was actually rape? Do we just take them at their word, or do we have to go through an investigation?
You most certainly take them at their word. You physically can't go through an investigation without already forcing the pregnancy, and at which case, if it is rape and the abortion was legal and the baby's already out, what do? Step on the fucking infant? You're stupid.
Abortion is endorsed by some religious organizations, therefore it's okay. I don't care.
Right, I'm skipping this. I agree with him. I don't care. That doesn't make sense. Doesn't matter who the fuck supports abortion. You should have your own opinion, your own statistical opinion supported by facts.
Conservatives are pro-life, but yet they support the death penalty. LMA.
Once again, he explains this, and he explains with like multiple statistics and things like that. I'm only skipping over this because I believe that there doesn't need to be that much information. It's pretty cut and dry that the death penalty should exist for the most heinous of criminals, and it's not murder. And the simple fact is that abortion isn't murder in the first place. So, also, this might be because some more far-right activists, not like John Doyle, I don't think at least, believe that the death penalty should be used more frequently, whereas that is legitimately wrong, and I think that we should focus on rehabilitation, but that's a different story.
Men are controlling women's bodies. Again, no. No one cares about your body. We're only caring about the child that's growing inside of it.
So, I see the point that he's trying to make, but inherently, the mother has the child in her body. So it's like, if A is B and B is C, then A is C. You have to use an equation to get there, and he's not using PEMDAS, if that makes sense. He's sort of just looking at the equation face value and denying it, when in reality, they're kind of correct in a way, but his point still stands.
Also, which men are you referring to? Half of women are pro-life, and about half of men are pro-life too. So what you're really upset about is that half of all men and women are trying to keep the other half of women from killing their children, and then that other half of men, they're just along for the ride because they think it'll make the feminists want to sleep with them.
Yeah, I mean, this is completely true, and then he goes off to talk about how men just want sex and stuff like that. So I'm going to skip that point because we've already established that's correct, and I agree with him, and there's nothing for me to even say.
Defending the importance of that. Here's a fun one. Men that are against abortion are sexually incompetent. This one isn't.
I don't need to neither me nor Doyle need to explain why. If you're just saying that if you get no pussy because you're pro-life, that's just more of a joke / insult that has no statistical value, and in this purely informational debate, there's no place for insults, so we're gonna skip that.
I took the high ground. You're taking us back to the 1940s. This one is really funny because you can really see the arrogance beneath it. They're saying that because we're going against leftist policies that are labeled progressive, that we are backtracking as a country. And this is arrogant and stupid, frankly, because it assumes that all of their ideas are inherently a net gain, that every single one of their ideas improves and progresses society. And if we do anything that goes against their ideas, what are you doing? You're taking us back in time. Like, evaluate the idea as is. Don't attach a date to it to make your argument. Hey, let's start dividing people into girls and boys. What are you... You're taking us back to 2015. Adoption.
Alright, so besides that weird part at the end where he sort of only implies that there's two genders, which is a completely different argument that I don't want to get into, he's pretty much right on the point. Any liberal who thinks that all conservative laws are regressing and they're idiotic are just simply arrogant and ignorant. However, once again, he's kind of missing the point. While I admit that most liberals might be insulting right-wingers and talking shit about them without giving true points, it's evident that in the case of Roe v. Wade, the country was simply happier when abortion was legal. Like I stated before, more than half of the Americans currently believe that women should have a right to abortion, constitutional or not. Abortion was and still is socially accepted by the majority. To take a previously socially and lawfully accepted situation and suddenly turn it, along with other mundane activities, legal is unnecessary, puzzling, and downright unconstitutional. This is precisely why you see hundreds of thousands, at the point this video comes out, possibly millions of people, not just pro-choice activists, not just liberals, socialists, communists, or any combination, but American citizens protesting for the codification of Roe v. Wade. Many of these same citizens don't even identify with a political party and are instead independent, and they're still fighting for the case of Roe. It would be at best a skewed statistic and at worst plain misinformation to say that only liberals are at these rallies supporting abortion. Then again, misinformation and lies are the language of politicians everywhere in America, both Republican and Democrat. So even if I bring up this point, of course it'll still be null and void, and he'll argue it to be incorrect. But I digress.
Adoption isn't an option because kids in foster care have it rough. Why do you get to decide that for them? Too hard? You should just die? Putting your child up for adoption is free. You can even receive living expenses from the adoptive family, like rent, food, clothes, utility, even a cell phone. Like, it's so possible. It's almost laughably possible, just how possible it is.
So I have a minor point here, and it's not even something wrong with Doyle because he's incredibly correct. He's fully correct. There are plenty of adoption options that are affordable or even free while maintaining your privacy. My only gripe is that both Republicans and Democrats don't mention this anywhere in mainstream media. It's irrefutable evidence that both sides only care about besting the other and being on top and not truly advocating for what the American people want. Whenever I've seen somebody make this claim that adoption doesn't really matter, I feel like they're just trying to advocate for any argument that a conservative gives them. In layman's terms, I'm saying that this argument is sort of a failsafe. A lot of people will just say, well, the baby won't survive long anyway, and even if they do, they'll have a horrible life of suffering, without thinking about the fact that you can prevent that most of the time. Like I said, most abortions in the US are administered on black women, and those same black women are the main demographic bringing up the terrible quality of adoption centers. This is a very real reality, mostly for black women. This is because of the systematic racism that has destroyed black-owned businesses, communities, and even majority black schools, medical centers, and, yes, adoption centers. It's no surprise that the majority of black women who get abortions would not want to use their horrible adoption process because there's an overwhelming chance that that child that they give to the center will be treated with little to no respect. Thus, while I agree with Doyle that there are affordable options, I would argue that we need more of these options and we need to increase the quality of all adoption centers, especially in these black communities. Instead of dismissing everybody's woes, look at the evidence and try to see if you can quell their cries of help. To simply dismiss all scenarios is ignorant.
If a guy can get a woman pregnant and run away, why is it the woman's responsibility? I agree. Yeah, we can reach an agreement there. We'll ban abortions and then we'll enforce the participation of the father, like how we already often do. That's reprehensible, and men that do that are pathetic excuses for men. You don't do that under any circumstances. Not to your wife, not to your kids. So yeah, I agree with this. But the solution is not to enable men to do this by allowing for abortion. The solution is to hold both the mother and the father accountable.
So once again, he's saying that we should hold the father and the mother accountable, but it's not the mother's fault for having sex with a man who she fell in love with and the man leaving her. The point of abortion isn't to just simply be a convenience, it's to help the woman get away from a difficult situation. Abortion doesn't help men leave women, it helps women from becoming a single mother with depression because she's struggling to care for her child. Doyle states that there are laws being enforced to prevent men from just leaving a child that he planted in a woman, but I fail to see this being true. In fact, when I was conducting my own research, I only found articles claiming the exact opposite, that there are no lies specifying what to do to the impregnator whether they leave or not. I would like to see a citation or something of where this law or bill presides. As of now, it's considered false because of the contrast evidence and the lack of supporting evidence he gives besides, this bill exists, so actually you're wrong. There's no legitimate source. Since there wasn't a lot to say in this point, I'm going to go off on a tangent and give you some random facts that I just think are pretty strange and should convince you to at least think more about the anti-abortion laws. As of right now, completing a now illegal abortion can net you anywhere from 5 years to 90 years in prison and even life, with no parole depending on the state. If we compare that to, I don't know, rape and incest, for example, incest is considered a victimless crime and you can get either fined or up to 10 years at max, with parole. Rape is punishable for the same fine or up to 20 years plus 10 more, which is 30 with no parole if you used a rape drug during the crime. My question is, why is the minimum amount of punishment for abortion drastically more severe than the minimum amount of punishment for a crime that literally causes women to get abortions because they're pregnant because they don't want to? Why is the max number of years for abortion drastically higher than 2 reasons women get abortions? In this country, if you completed an abortion for a rape victim, you would be more likely to get more time in jail without parole than the person who actually raped the woman. Furthermore, the person who directly caused the abortion to be an option for the woman. That's backwards logic, no matter which way you look at it.
Pro-life movement forces their morality onto others. We father accountable. Pro-life movement forces their morality onto others. We don't. We just leave it up to the woman to decide. First of all, there's no morality in the pro-choice movement. That's why they call it pro-choice and not pro-abortion. They have to frame it as if the other side is somehow oppressing women by restricting this fabled choice that they have as to whether or not to murder their child. If you don't agree that human life has value, you are out of touch with what we've established as objective morality. If you don't believe in objective morality, then of course this makes sense to you. If you reject the pro-life position that all life has value, then you are by definition immoral, because you don't conform to objective morality. And to this you'll say, well, John, you're trying to say that anyone who isn't pro-life is immoral. Not necessarily. Pro-abortion people are either ignorant or immoral. I find that it's typically the former. They agree that human life has value, but they've bought into this propagandized mainstream narrative that excludes life in the womb from that definition of life. Banning a...
So, he's actually correct here. The part at the end where he brings up this CNN article, fetus and the embryo are living human beings inside of the womb. That's completely correct. But he, once again, misses the point. I'm starting to see a pattern here. He just looks at the argument from a strange point of view and completely jumps over what people are actually trying to say. No one is saying that human life has no value. That is an objective fact that no pro-choice activist ever attempts to refute. Everything he says here is considered correct if and only if abortion is considered murder. Here's where I want to get into the definition. Murder is, by definition, the premeditated killing of another human person. Note the specific use of the word person in the dictionary. An embryo and a fetus are human beings. This is fact. They are not human people. The question of when life begins is a simple one that has been proven by science again and again as time goes on, so it is clear that embryos and fetuses are human beings. The question of whether or not they are people is a philosophical one, not a scientific one, and the nature of such a question cannot be proven nor disproven. There are many scientists, medical professionals, and ordinary people alike who consider unborn babies to be alive, but not people, hence they support abortion. Hey, future Zach, post in editing here. I googled the definition of murder again just so I could get the screenshot to put it on screen while editing, right? And the murder definition according to law is actually slightly different. Murder is the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought. So at first I was like, oh shit, my argument doesn't make sense. I said that they're not being murdered because they're not human people, they're human beings. But even according to the definition of law, it's still not murder because malice is described as having pure evil intent. When people get abortions, they're not evil. They're not thinking that they're destroying their beautiful life. They're not doing it in order to have some secret vendetta fulfilled. There's reasons that I previously mentioned in the video, and none of them are evil. This means that even if you look at the other definitions in law, his argument is still null and void. Therefore, by technical definition, aborting a baby is not murder because the baby isn't a person that is being killed. It's a human being that is being extracted in a medical procedure. There are also multiple scientists, medical professionals, and ordinary citizens who believe that there is a soul in an embryo and that fetus, that there's an untapped consciousness that hasn't yet bloomed, and thus it is a person. But how can you prove the existence of souls and or consciousness in the womb? You can't. There's a line between scientific and medical fact and hypothetical philosophical beliefs. Once again, the question isn't whether or not we believe all life matters, because we pro-choice activists do, as he states in the video. At the very least, I certainly do. While some argue that the embryo and fetus are not considered full human beings, I disagree, and I take Doyle's side on this standpoint. They are certainly alive and human beings. The real problem is the belief that abortion is murder, and I've already discussed that it is, by definition, not murder.
Banning abortions won't stop abortions. Yes, it will, to a large extent. We've gone over that. It will rewire the culture into taking more responsibility than they previously would have. Also, that's not even an argument against banning abortions. Don't make goring people with axes illegal, because people will still gore each other with axes. That's not the point. The point is that the law should reflect morality. And just because women want access to abortion does not mean that it's a morally correct policy.
Alright, so there's a small point here. He's right about the argument not technically advocating for why abortion should be legal. It's instead just referencing a popular Thomas Jefferson quote. If a law is unjust, a man is not only right to disobey it, he is obligated to do so. They believe the law is unjust for multiple reasons I stated before in this video, and so they're breaking the law. My only gripe is that he said abortion will dramatically decrease and that will rewire the social consciousness, which is only half true. The amount of abortions that can be seen and recorded will decrease, but there will still be a number of secret illegal abortions being administered. In fact, this might even cause more abortions to happen. Women and men might engage in sex just to get illegal abortions in order to spite the government, especially since statistically speaking, more than half of American citizens support abortion and want to turn Roe v. Wade into law. It's not far-fetched to say that there will be major pushback. In fact, it's exactly happened before in the form of prohibition. I feel like I don't need to explain it, but basically the Supreme Court outlawed the resale of alcohol, and it was met with so much pushback that the US government decided we essentially could never stop citizens from drinking. Therefore, the amendment was made null and void, meaning that alcohol was now legal again. In the years during Prohibition's uptime, the rate at which people were drinking alcohol was appearing to be at an all-time low. It wasn't until after its nullification that the real, and also illegal at the time, studies and statistics were revealed, showing that the rate at which people were drinking alcohol were in fact the exact opposite of what the Supreme Court intended. In fact, there were multiple people who never drank alcohol ever until their right to it was taken, and so they started drinking purely out of spite and actually abstained from it once again after the amendment was removed from the Constitution. Who's to say that the exact same thing won't happen again? Furthermore, that virgins will now rebel and have unprotected sex just to get abortion in what would be the biggest middle finger to the courts since Prohibition. He's wrong on the assumption that this law will just hardwire our brains into becoming pro-life, because we can just simply disagree, and there's plenty of evidence to support the pro-abortion argument.
If men could get pregnant, abortion would be a sacrament. Again, this is the same false male versus female narrative. It's also transphobic, by the way. Men can get pregnant too, bigot. But assuming the pre-2016 standards of reproduction, only women can get pregnant, yet half of them are against abortion. So your logic of this gender can't get pregnant, therefore they don't support it. Well, this gender can get pregnant, and half of them don't support it. And men can't get pregnant, but still about half of them don't support it.
Yeah, he's fully correct here, actually. It's just sexism to say that men can't get pregnant, and it's also just incorrect. I don't have anything to say here. He's completely right.
Babies are parasites to the mother. What a special thing to say. Wow. Aside from the obvious problems, it doesn't work on a literal level either. The biological definition of parasitism is a form of symbiosis in which one organism, called a parasite, benefits at the expense of another organism, usually of a different species, called a host. First, parasites are a different species, usually, than the host, and they unnaturally latch onto it to survive. Babies are the same species as their mother, and they're right there where they're supposed to be, in the womb, almost as if there was some sort of design behind this.
Yeah, so he's completely correct. Prohibition, holy shit. Pregnancy is more akin to mutualism than a parasite, so this is just completely void.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the socialist darling from New York, says that abortion is about trying to outlaw sex. No, it's about protecting the baby. But this really showcases their thought process quite well. They don't seem to accept the connection between sex and childbearing. If you're against abortion because you think it will outlaw sex, that must mean that you are talking about the type of sex that would require abortion. which is sex that is free of commitment, free of love, free of trust. They want to continue to embrace this sexual degeneracy and hedonism without having to accept responsibility for their actions. That's what it comes down to. This one's funny.
So, holy shit. There are massive problems here right off the bat. What type of sex is he referencing? Unprotected sex? Like I talked about earlier, is wanting to have sex while simultaneously not wanting a child immoral? Of course not. It's fully protected by the Constitution whether we want to use protection or not. Like I said earlier, only 70% of condoms are effective, so in the 30% chance that your condom breaks and you're being quote-unquote responsible, oops, fuck you, you're having the baby. Even though you're potentially happily married and took necessary precautions to prevent a baby from happening, you still got pregnant, and there's no exception, since if you don't want a baby, just don't have sex. I've already explained why this is a stupid viewpoint, so I won't touch on it anymore. But back to his points, he's saying that the type of sex, quote-unquote, that gives birth to a baby, which I'm assuming is always unprotected sex, is sex without love, trust, and commitment? Okay, so John Doyle is God now, and he decides whether or not your sex and or love life is real or not. You're in a loving relationship with a man or a woman or non-binary person, whoever. You're in a loving relationship with a person who wants to stay with you for life? What's that? You've been married for 5 years already? But you guys had sex without a condom for your own pleasure and health reasons, so obviously you two don't love each other and don't have commitment. Obviously you guys don't trust each other, there's no love here. You guys are just lusting and want to have sex constantly. Do you see what I'm getting at? His point is founded in absolutely nothing except his own moral opinion, which isn't objective. Even if it was the court themselves saying the exact same thing, you simply cannot dictate whether a relationship is loving and trusting or not based on an arbitrary factor such as whether or not you used birth control while having sex. Also, the abortion law is inherently linked to sex because contraceptives are also getting banned. If you truly wanted to protect the life of the unborn and your right to practice safe sex, wouldn't you also advocate for affordable, accessible, and higher quality contraceptives so that people wouldn't resort to abortions in the first place? There's a logical fallacy there, Doyle. Unless, of course, there's some reason besides the logical standpoint that you don't want people having unprotected sex. Could it be that perhaps most conservatives like John Doyle are assuming that most unprotected sex also occurs before marriage, in the premarital stage of your life? Even if that were so without any evidence stating that, that wouldn't be an issue. Unless, of course, once again, they were religious, but then again, they're not enforcing their religion on us, right? Or at least so they say. Either way, it's evident that there's an underlying reason here that they're attempting to mask with false statistics and assumptions about the healthy relationship of the couple. Not everybody who wants to practice safe sex without wanting a child is a hedonist, who is one who seeks only pleasure, by the way, in their life. And that's actually a philosophical standpoint. So if you're going to say that you can't use philosophy to prove that abortions are legal, then why did he use philosophy earlier to say that a human baby is a person who has a soul? Or at least he implied that. Like I was saying, however, not everybody who wants to have sex without wanting a child is a hedonist, and you can't prove that they are either, as there are other benefits to sex rather than just pleasure. It can establish a greater bond in the relationship, which immediately just nullifies his whole theory about not having a loving relationship. You need to have sex in order to have a truly perfect relationship. But there's no such thing as a perfect relationship anyway. Regardless, it can also boost your dopamine and serotonin production, which directly assist in subduing mental illnesses like depression and anxiety. It can boost your immune system, lower your risk of heart disease, give you a better sleep cycle, it can prevent certain cancers. I could go on and on and on, but of course, I don't need to. A simple Google search will disprove everything he's saying here. You can't say that the only reason people have sex is for pleasure and then call everyone a hedonist. You can't assume what people are thinking and the reasons behind their actions, and even if pleasure is the main reason why most have sex, you can't ignore the fact that there are multiple other reasons that people have sex, and his entire point here is null anyway because of what he believes is a quote-unquote loving relationship, which is, once again, nowhere near his nor the court's jurisdiction. That intrudes on our privacy, which is, once again, a right.
And hedonism without having to accept responsibility for their actions. That's what it comes down to. This one's funny. They think that when men masturbate, it's the equivalent of abortion. And this is because they don't understand the difference between a sperm and...
So I'm gonna skip this. Masturbating is not the same as abortion. The sperm was already in there beforehand and the embryo wasn't. So he once again brings up the point that, oh, well, you needed to have sex. It's not like the life was already there beforehand. You needed to create that life and then kill it. Whereas the sperm, we didn't create it. We're just immediately getting rid of it by masturbating.
They're pro-life until a child is born, then they don't care. They're not pro-life, they're pro-birth. Your right to life does not include your right to be provided for by someone else. Obviously, your parents should provide.
He's correct here, but he's kind of missing the point because if you force someone to have a baby in a low-income position and they can't afford for that child, it's your fault that they had to have the baby instead of having an abortion, and I've already explained why it's not the woman's fault or the man's fault for having sex, as having sex isn't a inherently bad thing. Even having unprotected sex isn't an inherently bad thing. So you do need to have some form of involvement in the child's life, at least helping the woman get money, helping the parents get money, the providers get money, helping the adoption systems and making them more affordable and better and higher quality so that the child can have a better life. So he's half correct and half wrong here, but I'm going to skip the rest of this because we don't need to listen to what else he says.
No uterus, no opinion. Again, that's transphobic. I don't need a uterus to talk about abortion. We have...
Once again, I'm skipping this. It is sexist and it is transphobic, and that's just basically it.
How is it that we ban abortion before we ban guns?
I'm not even going to let him finish. We already discussed this. We can't ban guns, and we shouldn't ban abortion. We should restrict guns and enforce better gun control, and abortion should be legal.
Teenagers shouldn't be involved in politics, and religion shouldn't be involved in government, and men should not be involved in women's healthcare. But here we are. Wow, how brave. The reason teenagers shouldn't be involved in politics is because we're stupid.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the point of that argument is. Teenagers shouldn't be fully involved in politics. They should be able to have information and be informed. They're allowed to form their own opinions, but they shouldn't be involved in politics. And once again, it's sexist to say that men can't be in women's health care. That's like saying a man can't be a gynecologist. Like, you're just going to gatekeep that from us?
A state that criminalizes abortion but ranks 50th in public education doesn't care about kids. Okay, well, to be fair, someone had to be last because that's how rankings work. Our public education is pretty subpar, especially for developed countries. Maybe we should have more private schools, who knows? But I'll tell you what, a state that has excellent public education but allows for its kids to be murdered cares less than a state that has terrible public education but does not allow for its kids to be murdered. This whole idea...
So, I'm going to pause again here because this is just completely wrong. Once again, circular reasoning. In order for this argument to be correct, we would have to assume that abortion's murder, and abortion is not considered murder. And just for the record, making more private schools that cost money won't necessarily increase the quality of the education. In fact, you'll just be denying that right to be educated in the first place to those who don't pay you. That's pretty parsimonious of you, John. Gatekeeping education, are we now?
Less than a state that has terrible public education but does not allow for its kids to be murdered. This whole idea that living takes precedence over the non-living, I mean, sure, if we're talking about voting on who gets to eat the last coconut and half of our island tribe is dead, I could buy into that. But the child is living. You cannot honestly reject that truth. The reason...
Yeah, this point is correct. He goes on to explain, but I've already explained why embryos and fetuses are just living human beings in their body. They have all of the DNA components to become a living human being, so therefore they are. They're not fully living people yet, and they're not even fully developed human beings, but they are human beings in a stage of development.
People bring up abortion but mock vegans. What does that even mean?
I don't know. I actually don't know what that means.
Oh, this one's not even about abortion, but this is like alarmingly...
Oh, that's right. This is like a racist thing that he just put in here for no reason. I don't know why he's talking about racism.
Teenagers shouldn't be involved in politics, and religion shouldn't be involved in government, and men should not be involved in women's healthcare. But here we are. Wow, how brave. The reason teenagers shouldn't be involved in politics is because we're stupid. I mean, obviously we should be able to comment about it, but voting at 16 is stupid. If anything, the voting age should be raised. But anyways, even if these were true, it's complete whataboutism. It's the tu quoque fallacy, tu quoque, however it's pronounced. Abortion isn't being banned because of religion. It's being banned on a secularly moral basis. So you're saying that because A and B agree on C, they're the same, which is another logic.
I missed this point. A a lot of conservatives are using religion behind their arguments. Maybe not the official ones like senators and, the judges in the court, because if they outwardly said, yeah, because of, I'm a Catholic, I can't really do that, they would just immediately be dismissed. But every ordinary citizen has religion behind, I wouldn't say every actually, most conservatives have religion behind their moral views, which you can't enforce onto other people, so he's actually wrong.
A fallacy. And also that men shouldn't be involved in women's healthcare. Abortion isn't healthcare. And again, we've gone over the identity politics. This is so boring. This whole idea that living takes precedence over the non-living. I mean, sure, if we're talking about voting on who gets to eat the last coconut and half of our island tribe is dead, I could buy into that. But the child is living. You cannot honestly reject that truth. The reason that it's such a controversial issue, the reason that mothers grieve after they get abortions, is because people recognize that what is growing inside of you is a separate human being that is alive and genetically different than you. You have an instinct as a mother to protect that life. When you work against that instinct, when you do something that you know is wrong, you experience guilt.
So I'm pausing here because there's only one point to refute. If women get depressed after abortions because they're not following their motherly instinct, then that contradicts with mothers getting baby blues. Why do they get depressed even though they're following their instincts by giving birth to the child? It's a simple answer. It's a complication that arises after the medical procedure that assists with the pregnancy occurs, and there's treatment for that. By that same logic, couldn't depression after abortion also be a mere side effect of the medical procedure that abortion rightfully is? Women will get depressed whether they have the baby or not. Their instincts are not in question here and are therefore irrelevant for this argument. If that doesn't convince you, let me give a quick analogy. Let's assume that abortion isn't murder for reasons I previously discussed, meaning we're also going to assume that this particular instinct argument of whether or not the mother is going against them is our only topic of debate. I have arachnophobia, a fear of spiders. This isn't hypothetical, this is real. I actually am scared of spiders. If I attempt to conquer my fear, my instinct, if you will, to avoid all spiders because they are harmful and terrifying to me, am I going against my instinct? Maybe I am, but the real question is this wrong? You might say, no, not in this instance, but who are you to choose which of my instincts are valid to ignore and which aren't? Who are you to choose which of the woman's instincts are valid to ignore and which aren't, especially when their instincts aren't even relevant in whether or not they become depressed, whether they abort the baby or not? Trick question, stop trying to be God. Travis Scott said it best. It's not in your jurisdiction.
Almost done. School shootings happen. United States, let's force an 11-year-old girl to give birth. This is a very small-minded way of thinking because it treats the United States as if it's one solid entity that acts and responds to things. And of course that's not true. We have people working trying to make schools safer. At the same time, other people are working to make sure that kids get a chance to go to school in the first place by, not being murdered by their parents. The fact that you're upset about school shootings proves that you recognize the value of human life. So it's just that you're too ignorant to recognize the validity of the stage of life that you used to be in, that we all used to be in. So last one.
So, before we continue to the last one, I'm just going to say he didn't really attack the point here. The fact that abortion is now illegal means that you are indirectly causing potentially children to have children, and that's fucked up. He just doesn't attack this at all because he knows it's wrong. But if I said that, I would be projecting, according to him, so let's move away from that point. Regardless, he's appealing to pathos here. We all know we were embryos, buddy. Calm down. Doesn't matter whether we were an embryo or whether we're an alien from fucking Mars. Once again, this argument doesn't really give a reason as to why abortion should be illegal. However, the argument that he's attacking doesn't really give a reason as to why abortion should be legal either. But rather, it brings to light that conservatives care more about abortion, which was protected by a law prior to the overturning, rather than a rising issue in America that is claiming hundreds upon hundreds month by month. However, there is some truth in what he's saying. Once again, we shouldn't ban guns, and we can't because we have a right to bear arms. We should just tighten up the process needed to lawfully carry. More babies will be born after criminalization of abortion, sure, But those same children will die gruesome deaths because of the ignorance that the court showed, because their priorities were not in check.
Of the stage of life that you used to be in, that we all used to be in. So last one. This one's not as stupid as the last few. It's still stupid, but the guy thinks he's being really smart. This one's somewhat viral on Twitter a few years ago. This guy Patrick Tomlinson tweeted this, and it's so cringe to see how he sets it up. Like, he makes himself sound like this intellectual demigod. He goes, whenever abortion comes up.
So I'm going to skip this because it's a very long explanation. Basically, the hypothetical is, if you were in a burning building, you can only save one of the following: a human child who's stuck and you need to save them from the burning building, or a couple million, it's not important, 1 million freshly frozen and preserved embryos. I'm going to skip to the point where he talks about it.
Hierarchy on them. Again, yikes. I mean, this guy is a total douche. His whole tactic here is claiming that everyone he's ever told this to has lied to him, and everyone always will. It's like, if we ignore that, if we ignore the fact this douchebag has to paint a very vivid and specific hypothetical and then preface it by saying no one has ever been able to answer, in order to make his point with this extreme hypothetical scenario, ignoring that, his thinking is flawed, because he's assuming that the value of life is a zero-sum game. Either it has value and you can't kill it, or it doesn't have value and you can kill it. If I were in a burning building with my mom and your mom, I'm saving my mom. If I were in a building with my mom and both of your parents, I'm saving my mom. That doesn't mean that your parents' lives aren't valuable. All human life has intrinsic value, but guess what? If we do away with the hypotheticals, you take away the smoke and mirrors. How about this one? I put a human embryo on the ground in front of you. Do you step on it? This isolates the variables. No zero sum. Either A, you agree its life is valuable, you don't step on it, or B, you don't agree its life is valuable and you step on it. Riddle me that one, Patrick. Or how about we do away with all the hypotheticals? I'm done with, I have a headache now if we're going to be entirely candid. Leave a comment with any arguments that
Alright, so this is the end of the video and he starts rambling. Final point, he's right here. I agree with him. This hypothetical is stupid and unnecessarily extravagant, and the nature of such isn't even a valid point for the abortion side. To answer Doyle's hypothetical, though, I would step on that embryo. It's not in a human mother's womb, therefore it would die regardless. It's a living being, yes, but in this scenario I either leave it to die slowly or I put it out of its misery. But embryos can't feel pain, actually, but in his belief they do. So would I let it sit there and feel quote-unquote pain and just let it die slowly, or would I put it out of its misery? Either way it'll die, so I actually really don't care whether I step on it or not. I just think it would be funny to spite Doyle, so I'm mashing that baby. And yeah, go ahead, take that quote out of context, because while you do that, I'm already posting practically everyone who's cool came from a broken home sarcastically on my Twitter. Courtesy of John Doyle, of course. Those are his words and not mine. Personally, I think it's great that I have a loving and financially stable family who is able to provide for me everything I've ever wanted and needed, but I guess I don't get to sit at the cool kids table with Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, Michael Knowles, and Doyle alike. Oh well, I think I'll just play Pokemon on my DS during Inside Recess, like always. At the end of this video, he then goes to spit a wave of insults and assumptions at the camera, saying my ancestors are frowning upon me and shit. Well, joke's on him, because most of my ancestry is Native American, and they damn sure don't want me listening to a white boy like you. Yet I did, and I refuted every point that I believed to be incorrect. Now, while this video, both mine and his, was full of a bunch of insults and assumptions about how the other side perceives themselves and how they act, I'm just going to say straight up that I don't believe Doyle's a bad person. He's truly emotional and passionate about what he talks about, and he has done some of his research, and he did make some good points here. Most of the points he made here, I didn't have anything to say because they were legitimately good points, and he refuted dumb liberal arguments. I'm a centrist, not a liberal, so I can agree that some conservatives have some good plans and some liberals have some good plans, and there's really no one or the other. It's kind of a gray area, and I can admit that. I would just like to say, don't send John Doyle any hate. He definitely gets enough. I was just making this video in order to give my opinion on the standpoint and refute every argument that he refuted, and, you know, give a little bit of clarification on the things that I believe were incorrect, because this got a lot of views, and I feel like a lot of people are going to be using it to support their arguments, like the person that I'm debating with in Discord. So I will just say that I believe abortion should still be legal. I'm still pro-choice. This video didn't change anything about what I think. it changed slight amounts of how I perceive stupid arguments like whether or not you have a uterus and whether you should be able to reply and make a political argument, but he didn't necessarily change my thinking. However, it did get me thinking, period, which is the point of all political videos, I suppose. So, good on you, Doyle. Well, that's the end of this video. I suppose, if you only came here for the politics, you can click off, but suppose I should talk about why I was gone for so long and didn't make videos. I was just focused on school and shit. I mean, it's just a simple answer. I was just doing other things and didn't have time to record. How am I going to end this video? I mean, it was pretty serious, and I don't just want to say some half-assed joke and then, nullify everything I've said by making myself seem unintelligent. I mean, I have a dedicated outro and everything, but I can't think of any other way to end the video besides just cutting myself off.